So Keegan Bradley has made his picks for the U.S. Ryder Cup team. Time to talk about what he did. Chris Breeze, Paul Haladawanek, and Will Gray here for the PGA Tour. Will, no Keegan on the team, good or bad?
I mean, we're going to find out in about a month, right? Whichever way he went, it was all going to be decided on the scorecard on Sunday. If they win and he plays, it's the best call ever. If they lose, he's fumbled the bag. I think the same thing here. He's setting himself up for success. I would say an objective mind would look at this as probably the right move, but I will say we need to take a moment to mourn the content that we have lost, because it would have been an incredible moment. The scenes would have been awesome at Bethpage if Keegan called his own number. He decided not to. The 6 guys he picked are certainly worthy. But Paul, I know we were talking in the days leading up to this. It really felt like it was going back and forth on whether or not Keegan was going to pick Keegan.
Yeah, it felt like Keegan could have picked himself over maybe 3 of the players he ended up picking. So the fact that it wasn't just like a 1-versus-1 swap, it felt, I mean, drama watching those picks. Like we're watching them come through together here at the office, and each one we're like, oh, checking a box off the list. Oh, does that mean Keegan's not on? Does that mean he's not on? Like it was down to the wire there where we thought he might be a pick. And I think you're right. If you're rooting for entertainment, Keegan Bradley being on that team, if you're rooting for the U.S.A.'s chance to win back the Ryder Cup, I'm at least a proponent that this was the best outcome for the U.S.'s team's chance to win.
Because I think a lot of us assumed that Keegan was going to pick himself, and it was interesting to hear him say that he really only had a fleeting thought after he won the Travelers of him being on the team, and he truly believed in all 6 of his captain's picks. I don't know if there was a reason he went from Justin Thomas first to Sam Burns last, but you mentioned 3, Paul. I think the 3 guys that you may disagree, Will, that you think that he may have picked himself over. Sam Burns was 1. You agree?
Yeah.
Yep.
Cameron Young?
Yep.
I thought Colin Morikawa was a surprise pick to me. What did you guys think?
I mean, I think that it was. I think Morikawa was more likely to be on. The ceiling is very high on Colin Morikawa, especially an alternate shot. So I know he's had a tough stretch through the last few months. I think for me, it was Keegan, Young, and Burns, a 3-for-2 playoff of sorts. I thought Sam Burns was going to be the odd man out. I admit I didn't really factor in as much as I should have the fact that Sam Burns is basically the best putter on the PGA Tour this year. That's going to come in handy at Bethpage for sure. And Cam Young stepped up at the right time, winning Wyndham, playing well in the playoffs, and obviously it has a really good course comp for Bethpage. I think that in the middle of the summer, Keegan said this in his press conference or in his scrum afterwards, after the combination of him winning the Travelers in June and then looking around at who else he would fill the team out with, I think there really was a moment or a month or so where he was going to call his own number. I remember he played at the PGA Championship. I think he was paired with McNeely, Novak, or some combination of guys that were kind of on the fringe of Ryder Cup discussion, and he dusted them. He ended up finishing T8 at Quail Hollow, and it really that built into the Travelers win, and it felt like he's going to look around. You're going to have a tough time finding 12 Americans to pick for that team that don't include Keegan Bradley. As he said in his comments, though, Paul, I mean, the guys stepped up at the right time. Cam Young winning. Cantlay showed some form at East Lake at the end. Burns put up a couple of good finishes, including the BMW. So when they needed to start stacking some of the results to make it harder for Keegan to pick himself, they went ahead and did that.
Yeah, I hesitate to fully believe when Keegan says it was only a fleeting thought. I think we saw him deliberate it pretty heavily throughout the Open Championship, and then when we were back in stateside, even into the playoffs, calling it one of the toughest decisions he's ever going to make. He even mentioned on Monday, this last Monday, he was walking around kind of moping around, knowing he probably at that point wasn't going to pick himself, but I don't think it was until after Tour Championship where that fully realized. If he goes and wins the Tour Championship, like I think he might be on this team. But like we talk about, Will, I think Cam Young probably winning at Wyndham was probably a big step to saying, okay, Cam might be on the team. All this form that we're seeing pays off with a win. He continues that into the playoffs. Sam Burns obviously popped off at the U.S. Open, kind of continued that run of form throughout the summer. But yeah, I think if we were having this discussion and we were contemplating the 12th pick being Chris Gotterup or Keegan Bradley, even Maverick McNeely or Keegan Bradley, some of those more unproven guys, some of the guys that have just kind of had spots where they've kind of shown out, but otherwise haven't been up to the level of Keegan, I think it would have been a much tougher choice. But the 6 that he decided on, like, I think you can look at this team of 12 and you can't say definitively that Keegan Bradley is better than any one of those players. Right. And so I think that's when it made it, kind of the clear decision for him, and I think makes it the best outcome here when it's ambiguous whether he could have been one of the 12 best, but I think being it ambiguous, it's better to just leave yourself on the sidelines.
Yeah, and I think going back to what our media colleague and friend Cal Porter put out on Twitter afterwards, that the European team gets so many flowers for thinking from a team-first mentality, and that's not necessarily been a strength of the U.S. side, and this is a great example of listen, no one wants to play this Ryder Cup more than Keegan Bradley, and you can say that about every Ryder Cup since 2012. And for him to lay down his sword, essentially, and say, listen, I'm going to ride with my guys, I'm going to focus on the captaincy, and I'm going to trust that they're going to bring it home, is a moment that has been few and far between on the U.S. side, I would say, in recent years at the Ryder Cup, and it's one that is likely to galvanize those 12 guys and have them running through a wall come Friday morning.
I also think he feels really good about aspects of some of these players' games who he could have picked himself over. You talk about Burns with the putter. You talk about Morikawa with the irons. So it feels like Keegan Bradley in general knew the team atmosphere, the team function that you're talking about was going to succeed and thrive, knowing those guys had awesome attributes. We'll see what happens Sunday singles, but again, that's a month away, and all the different things that a guy's game could go through between now and then. How about the guys who didn't get picked? Of course, he's not going to name names who were difficult to call. Remember the quote he made, Will, the other day. He said, there's some guys in the team who probably thought they were on it that aren't going to be on it. Was there anybody in your mind that you thought spoke to that when he made that comment?
Yeah, I think Keegan. Outside of that, I think there was a long period where Keegan thought Keegan was going to be on the team. I mean, listen, Mav McNeely was at 10th. He's the highest rated person on the final points list. Not to get in, I think that felt like a little bit of a stretch when we were looking at some of the candidates. He didn't necessarily jump off the page. There hasn't been a great Mav McNeely moment this year. I know he did win the RSM last year. This breaks a streak for Jordan Spieth. This is the first time since, I believe, 2012. A team that Keegan was on that will have a U.S. Ryder Cup team that won't include Jordan Spieth, despite the highs and lows that he's had. Always has been a fixture in team match play in the Ryder Cup, particularly over the last decade. So those are some guys you look back at the 23 team, whether it's Wyndham Clark, Ricky Fowler, Max Homa. Those guys have had certainly plenty of ebbs and flows among them over the last 2 years. Hard to leave that experience on the sideline. It did sound like Mav might have been the toughest call for him to make, just because he ended up taking multiple guys that were ranked behind him in the final standings. But no one that's jumping off the page from me, Paul, that really feels like a snub if Keegan had decided that Keegan wasn't going to be on the team.
Yeah, it feels like maybe the 13th man was Maverick McNeely, just based on standings, based on the way he's playing. You can say Sam Burns is the best putter in the world, and at least this season, strokes gained wise, he was. I think Maverick McNeely is right in there in that conversation. So if they were looking for a specialist on the greens, I think he's right there as well. I kind of go back to something that Adam Schreiber, JJ Spahn's coach, told me at the U.S. Open after Spahn won, was that, I mean, they were exuberant talking about how Spahn's on the Ryder Cup team, and he made a comment that basically the leadership had told Spahn's team, like, we're not going to pick you unless you automatically qualify. And Keegan kind of reiterated similar language, not quite as black and white, in his presser today when he said, if you're a rookie, you can't assume to make the team unless you're in the top 6. And that was answering a question, I think, specifically about Maverick McNeely. And so I think we did see a couple make it this year that weren't outside of it. Ben Griffin, obviously. Cameron Young's played on a President's Cup team. This will be his first Ryder Cup. But I think a lot of those guys, if they've never played in a cup, probably didn't feel certain that they were going to be on this team. Maybe Brian Harmon's upset he's not on the team, but he didn't play that particularly great in the second half of the season. Wyndham Clark kind of fell out of form as well. Those were two guys that were there 2 years ago that aren't going to be on this team. But I kind of think he got it right with this 12. It felt like a pretty cut and dry, 6th and then 7th person being himself that he was choosing from. I don't think there was much deliberation beyond that.
All of this kind of ties into... Sorry, go ahead, Will.
No, I was just going to say, I would agree with that. And I do think, listen, we're taping this a few days before the European team is rounded out by Luke Donald, but I think it's going to be a fascinating dynamic now, knowing the 12 that we have from the U.S. side that includes 4 rookies going up against a European team that very likely, it seems like it's going to be 11 of the 12 from Italy, and you swap out Nikolai for Rasmus Højgaard, and they're going to have more of the experience factor. You have the same captain from 23, the same players that kind of dusted the Americans, albeit I know it's a huge shift going home versus away, but seeing how that dynamic plays out, where you've got Spawn and Henley that qualified, you've got Ben Griffin and Cameron Young as rookies that Keegan Bradley selected. There's going to be a lot of new blood on the U.S. side, and maybe not so much for Team Europe.
Incredibly hypothetical, but like I think if this wasn't away, I think you might have seen Keegan pick himself for that. I think it'd be easier to be a rookie at home when that New York crowd is rooting for you and not jeering you, and it's not your first time in this stage, and you're just like thousands and thousands of people are rooting against you. So I think it lends itself to more rookies for a home team than away. So I think that's kind of how the Euro team has fallen regardless. But I think easier for the U.S. team to bring in rookies than the Euros.
The last comment I wanted to make was all the hoopla around he's going to break up the good old boys club. And we've basically talked about every name who was in the good old boys club. You could say, Spawn wouldn't make the team if he didn't auto qualify. What's that good old boys club? He should be on the team. He did make the team. Spieth was never considered. Harmon was never considered. You could say that Cantlay and Morikawa are good old boys club, but I don't feel that way about those guys, Will. The fact that Patrick Cantlay was the heart and soul of the last U.S. Ryder Cup team tells you everything. And then Colin Morikawa, to your point, needs to be on the team because of certain aspects of his game and his experience. So the good old boy club, to me, that litmus test that he had to hold himself to that standard, I think he passed it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are scenarios with different captains and different universes where Ben Griffin might not be on this team. I think that was someone that even entering this week, I was like, he should be on the team. He's one of the top 5, 6, 7 American players in the world this year, but that didn't feel like a sure thing because he's kind of an outsider. Even Julius Mason of the PGA of America was feeling that question of how many of these guys' phone numbers did you have a year ago or 2 years ago? So I think that's the one that stands out to me as the mold breaker of sorts, but it just goes to show how much a guy like Ben Griffin had to overachieve. You had to be in the top 6, 7, 8 of the best Americans. Being 12th or 10th like Maverick McNeely might not have been enough. So listen, again, I agree with Paul. When you look at this team in a world where Keegan Bradley isn't going to play, this feels like the 12. It's pretty cut and dry, but that does include a guy like Griffin or even Cam Young that surged on late before the Wyndham win. I don't know that if you pick 12 that Cam Young makes that squad, even though he does have that affinity for Bethpage. So the late crawl for him, and then certainly the season-long really strong performance from Griffin stood out and bore enough.
And if you're someone who really thought Keegan should have been on this team, that you unequivocally thought Keegan Bradley's better than a Cam Young, better than a Ben Griffin, better than a Sam Burns, I'm not going to argue with you there. We can look at the numbers and try to break it down. The Ryder Cup's in a month, and they're playing in match play, which they don't play in front of a crowd. They never play. So we can go back and forth on that. But what I do think the asset of him just being the captain is if he was playing, he's going to have to weigh how many sessions he's playing. So you're then hamstringing one of your 12 guys already by how much he may or may not be able to play, what sessions he might be able to play. You're hamstringing what you can do as a captain. So I think when you add in those holistic elements of what he was taking away from being a captain, if he was going to have to kind of split the duties, because you can't just do both 100%, I think that's the tiebreaker that ultimately he looked at and why I think it makes it the right decision.
We're not worried about the content, Will. We know we're going to get plenty of it at the end of September. No problem with that.
It would have been so much better if he played.
We have so much more to get to on the Ryder Cup. This is just the beginning. The European team will make their picks early next week on Monday, Labor Day. Then the three of us will be back next week for a full preview of the Ryder Cup. Who should play with who? Did the European team get it right? And what do we expect coming out of Bethpage Black at the end of September?